welcome to the Lost Sci-Fi Story channel. If you're ready, let's begin today's story.
The shuttle made a sound on final approach that Damon had never heard a shuttle make before. A low, intermittent groan from somewhere beneath the passenger cabin floor, rhythmic enough to suggest it was mechanical and not, say, the vessel expressing an opinion about its own structural integrity. He looked down at the floor panel. The floor panel offered no explanation. The man sitting across the aisle from him, a broad Telvari with gray-green skin, and the general demeanor of someone who had been traveling for so long he had achieved a kind of spiritual detachment from the concept of arriving, caught Damon's glance and simply said, "She always does that on the meridian approach. Something about the gravitational gradient. They've been meaning to look at it for 2 years." He paused. "They will not look at it." Damon nodded and returned his eyes to the viewport. Meridian Cross Station resolved slowly from the dark, first as a cluster of running lights, then as a shape, then as the particular shape it was, which was less the elegant ring designs favored in transit brochures, and more the shape of something that had been added to repeatedly over many decades by people who disagreed with each other. There were 3 primary habitat rings at mismatched angles, a central operations column that listed very slightly to the port side, 4 docking pylons of different lengths, and what appeared to be an entirely separate, smaller structure bolted to the station's underbelly that had no obvious architectural relationship to the rest of the facility. It looked, in the most affectionate possible reading, like an act of engineering commitment. It looked, in a less affectionate reading, like several stations had collided and decided to cooperate. Damon picked up his data tablet, looked at it, and put it back down. He had stopped reading the Cathara 7 project closure documentation somewhere over the 3rd system marker and had not found the motivation to return to it. The documentation was 800 pages long, and the last 200 pages were appendices about drainage specifications for corridors he had personally built, in a vacuum, while managing a team of 14 people across 3 species who communicated scheduling conflicts in 4 different languages, 2 of which used tonal inflection to indicate urgency, meaning that an annoyed Selvari engineer and an extremely urgent Selvari engineer sounded, to an untrained human ear, completely identical. He felt he had read enough drainage specifications to last a reasonable lifetime. What he wanted was eggs. Real eggs, ideally, though he had made peace with the synthesized variety during the Cathara project when real eggs had become a luxury item, traded with the solemn gravity of diplomatic negotiations. He wanted eggs and something hot to drink, and a bunk assignment that did not share a ventilation shaft with the waste processing unit, which had been his situation for the final 8 months on Cathara 7, and which had given him a relationship with ambient station smell that he was still, technically, recovering from. The docking clamps engaged with a thud that rattled the overhead bins and triggered a soft alarm from someone's improperly secured equipment case 3 rows forward. A small silver sphere, approximately the size of a fist, rolled down the aisle with the quiet dignity of something that had absolutely not expected to be here and was making the best of it. Damon stopped it with his foot. Nobody claimed it. He set it on the empty seat beside him, and it sat there for the remainder of docking with what he could only describe as an attitude. He was 23rd in the disembarkation queue. He knew this because the transit system had sent him a notification about it, which was the kind of detail that the transit system had apparently decided was worth communicating. Along with the current atmospheric pressure in the main concourse, the queue wait time at the customs verification pod, and a brief message informing him that his luggage had been flagged for a secondary scan due to the presence of an unlabeled metallic object, which was almost certainly the collapsible multi-tool he had forgotten to declare and absolutely intended to recover without incident. He cleared customs in 14 minutes, which the verification officer told him was quite good, and then he was through, and Meridian Cross Station opened around him with all the particular energy of a place that had never once in its entire operational history been quiet. The main concourse was vast and layered, 3 open levels connected by transit lifts and wide ramp corridors, populated with the kind of dense, multi-species crowd that generated its own ambient noise. A low, living hum of 100 conversations in a dozen languages, the electronic chime of vendor kiosks, the announcement system cycling through arrival information in standard and 3 regional dialects. Damon stood at the concourse entrance with his bag on his shoulder and his tablet under his arm, and let it wash over him for a moment. The noise and the light and the sheer compressed reality of a place full of people, and felt something in his chest quietly unknot. He had a reporting time of 1400 hours. It was currently 12:42. He had, in other words, exactly enough time to find the cafeteria, determine the egg situation, and begin his new assignment as a human being who ate breakfast at irregular hours in unfamiliar places, which was, when he considered it honestly, most of what his career had always been. He started across the concourse. He did not get far. She looked up and it was him. That was the complete thought. It did not arrive with analysis or qualification. It did not pause to consult the 3 years of documented evidence suggesting it could not possibly be him. It simply presented itself, fully formed and entirely certain, the way a structural fault announces itself, not as a question but as a fact, immediate and load-bearing and impossible to argue with once you have seen it. It was him. He was standing approximately 40 meters across the concourse with a bag on his shoulder and a tablet under his arm, paused at the edge of the crowd with the expression of someone who had just remembered they were hungry. And it was him. It was his posture. It was the particular way he stood with his weight slightly forward. It was the angle of his head. It was the fact that she knew this person in her bones in a way that 3 years of absence and an official death record, and an entire elaborate architecture of grief, had apparently done nothing to dismantle. The sound that came out of her was not something she chose to make. It left her body before she had finished processing what she was seeing, a cry that was half his name and half something that had no word in any language she spoke, something that had been compressed inside her chest for 1,000 days, and chose this moment, without consulting her, to exit. The beings nearest to her in the crowd stepped back, not unkindly, the way crowds understand instinctively that something is happening that requires space. She ran. She was not a person who ran in public spaces. She was a person who moved with deliberate efficiency and mild disapproval of people who treated station concourses as athletic venues. She ran anyway, because there was no version of this moment that involved a composed and measured approach, because he was 40 meters away and then 30 meters away and then 20. And her vision had gone strange at the edges the way it did, when her biology decided that whatever was happening was too significant for peripheral information, and she could feel her skin cycling through colors she had not worn in 3 years. The amber of shock and the pale silver blue draining out of her entirely, and replacing itself with something her species produced only in extreme states of emotion, a deep, pulsing gold that she could not have controlled any more than she could have controlled the tears that were already moving down her face in cold lines of bioluminescent light. Damon heard the sound before he saw its source. He heard it the way everyone within 20 meters heard it, as something that cut through the ambient noise of the concourse, not by being louder than everything else, but by being made of different material entirely, raw in a way that station noise was not raw, carrying a frequency of genuine human, of genuine feeling, that the body recognized before the mind had time to categorize it. He turned toward it. He saw a woman running at him with the focused velocity of someone who had identified a specific target and had no remaining interest in anything else in the known universe. His first thought, he would later admit, was that he had done something wrong at customs. His second thought, arriving approximately 1 second later as his eyes resolved the details of who was running at him, was a thought that had no language, a thought that was made entirely of the particular vertigo of seeing someone you know somewhere your understanding of the world says they cannot be. Then his understanding of the world stopped mattering. Sail, he said, and the word came out without volume, barely air, because his lungs had temporarily resigned from their responsibilities. She hit him at full speed, which was considerable, and his bag went one direction and his tablet went another, and his arms went around her because there was no alternative, because she was there and shaking and making sounds against his shoulder that were not words in any language, and were somehow the most coherent thing he had heard in years, and he held on. The concourse moved around them. Somewhere behind him, he heard his tablet strike the floor. Somewhere to his left, an automated freight cart announced in a polite synthetic voice that its path was obstructed and would those in its way please relocate. And then, apparently reading the situation, stopped announcing this and simply waited. Even the freight carts, on Meridian Cross, had developed a sense of occasion. He could feel her shaking. He could feel the wet warmth of the bioluminescent tears soaking through the shoulder of his jacket, and he had a vague awareness that this meant his jacket was now faintly glowing, which was not a situation any pre-departure checklist had prepared him for. He did not care about the jacket. He was holding on with the grip of someone who has just understood, in a way that the mind can understand things suddenly and completely without having approached the understanding gradually, that something terrible had happened to someone he loved, and that the terrible thing had been him, and that she had believed it for 3 years, and that he had not known, and that not knowing did not make it his fault, but also did not prevent him from feeling it land in the center of his chest like a structural failure, sudden, total, and reordering everything that had been standing before it. He held on, she let it go. 3 years of it, in the middle of the main concourse of Meridian Cross Station, at 12:48 in the afternoon, with an automated freight cart waiting patiently at a respectful distance, and approximately 40 beings either looking away out of courtesy, or looking directly at them out of the specific fascination that genuine human, that genuine feeling produces in those who witness it unexpectedly. She let all of it go, and it shook through her whole body in waves, and he stayed standing so she didn't have to. They found a bench eventually. It was not a dignified process. Damon's tablet had slid under a vendor cart and required negotiation with the cart's automated inventory system, which had logged it as an unidentified foreign object and was prepared to file a report. Sale's security badge had fallen from her jacket pocket somewhere in the sprint and was located by a young Selvari station worker who brought it back with the careful formality of someone returning a dropped crown, his eyes very deliberately not asking any of the questions that were obviously occurring to him. The automated freight cart, once they had moved aside, resumed its journey with what Damon could only interpret as a dignified restraint, as though it had witnessed something and chosen, professionally, not to comment. They sat. The concourse continued around them at its own pace, indifferent in the way that populated stations are always ultimately indifferent, too full of its own motion to attend for long to any single event within it. Sale had stopped shaking. Her skin had not returned to its resting color. It stayed in the deep pulsing gold, warm and involuntary, the biological equivalent of a feeling too large to be entirely contained. But her breathing had steadied, and she was sitting upright, and she had the expression of someone who has cried past the crisis point and arrived at the quieter country on the other side of it, exhausted and clearer than before. Damon had his elbows on his knees and was looking at his hands. He was trying to construct a sentence that was adequate to the situation, and finding that the situation had outpaced the available vocabulary. "I didn't know," he finally said, which was true and also completely insufficient. And he knew it was insufficient, and she knew he knew, and neither of them pretended otherwise. The name error in the medical system. They told me afterward that it had caused confusion in the database, but I thought confusion meant paperwork delays. I didn't know it meant. He stopped. I didn't know it meant you were looking for me in a casualty report. Sale was quiet for a moment. Then she said, in the precise, level voice she used when she was managing something enormous by treating it as something administrative. The official confirmation came 11 days after the accident. A station liaison, standard procedure. She paused. She was very thorough. She had documentation. Another pause shorter. I appreciated the documentation at the time. I have revised that position. He looked at her. She was not looking at him. She was looking at the middle distance of the concourse with the focused non-focus of someone organizing their interior architecture in real time. I held a memorial, she said. My colleagues were very kind. Someone brought food that was incorrect for the occasion but genuinely delicious, and I did not have the emotional bandwidth to address it, so I ate it. And then I felt guilty about the eating for approximately 2 weeks before I decided that you would have found it funny. The gold of her skin deepened briefly, something that was not quite a smile and was more than one. You would have found it very funny. You would have made a remark about it and then pretended you hadn't. I absolutely would have, Damon said. I know, Sale said, and the thing that happened in her voice when she said it was something he felt in his sternum. He had been reconstructing the timeline in the background of the conversation, the way he always reconstructed structural problems, methodically, from the foundation upward. And the picture it made was one he was going to have to sit with for longer than this bench, and this afternoon could accommodate. He had spent 18 months of the Cathara project working alongside her. He knew what she was capable of professionally, which was formidable. And he knew what she was like at 3 in the morning when the shift ran long, and the work was going wrong, and she held everything together with the quiet force of someone who simply refused to let it fall. And he knew that she made tea every morning in the same sequence of precise movements, and that she laughed at things he said before he had finished saying them, which was either evidence of remarkable intuition or proof that she had learned to predict him, and either possibility had always seemed to him like something worth paying attention to, something he had been filing under later, under when the project wraps up, under when there's more time. There was a Selvari family moving through the concourse nearby, 2 adults managing what appeared to be 4 small children and a cargo trolley that one of the children had claimed as a personal vehicle. The logistics were not working out. One of the adults caught Damon's eye with the expression of someone 3 standard hours into a situation that had not improved and was not going to. Damon offered a small nod of solidarity. The Selvari parent returned it with the gravity of a person acknowledging a fellow traveler on a difficult road, and then the trolley went sideways and the moment ended. I need to report to the operations office, Damon said. My posting starts at 1400. He looked at his tablet, which had survived its encounter with the vendor cart with only a new scratch across the lower casing that the inventory system had, he sincerely hoped, not filed a claim about. It is currently 1322. I am aware of the time, Sale said, with the dry precision that meant she was pulling herself back to solid ground through the reliable medium of practical information. And he recognized this, because he knew her, and knowing her was something that 3 years and a death record and a bureaucratic catastrophe had apparently done nothing to touch. The operations office is on level 3, corridor 7. You will be early, which they will note, and they will not tell you they noted it, and it will improve your administrative relationship with them for approximately 6 months. That's very specific. I have been here 18 months. I know where the levers are. He was going to say something else. He had several things queued. He had 3 years of things he had not said and a particular awareness. Sitting on a bench in the main concourse of Meridian Cross Station, with 13 minutes before he had to be somewhere. That later was a system that had already failed him once catastrophically, and was not entitled to his continued trust. I filed you under later, he said. Everything I wanted, I kept moving it to when there was more time. And then there was no time except it turned out there was, except neither of us knew that. Sale looked at him. The gold of her skin had not faded. "Yes," she said, "I don't want to keep filing things under later." "No," she said, "I've done the math on that. The projected returns are very poor." He laughed, short and real, and she did something with her face that was a smile arriving after a long journey, travel-worn and slightly delayed but entirely genuine. The concourse moved around them. The freight cart passed again on some return errand, and Damon was almost certain, though he could not prove it, that it took a marginally wider path around their bench than its programming strictly required, as if it had logged their coordinates and decided they constituted a fixed installation worth routing around, something present now and not temporary, something that had found its place in the station's permanent geography and intended to remain. He picked up his bag, she stood. They looked at each other in the way that people look at each other, when words have run slightly ahead of what either of them is prepared to do with them. And the moment has the particular quality of something that does not require resolution right now, only acknowledgement, only the understanding that both of them are here and intend to keep being here, which is more than either of them had 3 days ago, when the universe was still arranged incorrectly. "Corridor 7, she said. "Corridor 7, he agreed. She walked with him to the ramp,